The atheist proposition is the following, most of the time. It may not be said that there is no God. It may be said that there is no reason to think that there is one. That was the situation after Lucretius and Democritus and the original anti-theistic thinkers began their critique of religion. And I would just ask you all, ladies and gentlemen, to bear in mind a mild distinction while we go on. You may wish to be a deist, as my heroes Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were, and you may not wish to abandon the idea that there must be some sort of first or proximate cause or prime mover of the known and observable world and universe. But even if you can get yourself to that position, which we unbelievers maintain is always subject to better and more perfect and more elegant explanations, even if you can get yourself to that position, all your work is still ahead of you. To go from being a deist to a theist, in other words, from someone who says, God cares about you, knows who you are, minds what you do, answers your prayers, cares which bits of your penis or clitoris you saw away or have sawn away for you, minds who you go to bed with and in what way, minds what holy days you observe, minds what you eat, minds what positions you use for pleasure. All your work is still ahead of you, and lots of luck. Because there's nobody, even Aquinas had to give it up. There's no one who can move from the first position to the second. So I could, and I'm actually strongly tempted to, I could leave it right there. But then it's not in my nature to let off a captive audience so easily. So I'll add a couple of things. The reasons why I am glad this is not true would, I suppose, be the gravamen of my case. Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just, admittedly rather briefly, rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and, even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate? I've been to North Korea. It has a dead man as its president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and head of the army. He's not head of the government of the state. That office belongs to his deceased father, Kim Il-sung. It's a necrocracy, a thanatocracy. It's one short of a trinity, I might add. The son is the reincarnation of the father. It is the most revolting and utter and absolute and heartless tyranny the human species has ever evolved. But at least you can fucking die and leave North Korea. Does the Quran or the Bible offer you that liberty? No. No. The tyranny, the misery, the utter ownership of your entire personality, the smashing of your individuality only begins at the point of death. This is evil. This is a wicked preachment. So, that's the first thing. Second, it attacks us in our deepest, most essential integrity. It's an insult to us in other ways. It says that we, you and I, could not, individually or collectively, decide upon a right action or a right thing without celestial, divine permission. We would not know right from wrong if we did not have heaven's permission to do so. Where else how else could we know? Our human solidarity, our innate knowledge of right and wrong, our acute awareness of what is fair and what is unfair, what is just and worthless to us, these come to us also as gifts from the great unassailable dictator enthroned. What could abolish our integrity? What could abolish our honesty, our decency, our dignity more than that? The third, is a little more pragmatic. Religion is our first, that's why I'm so fascinated with it, it's our first version of the truth. It's our first attempt as a species. It's what we tried when we didn't know anything. We didn't know we lived on a spherical planet. We didn't know that our planet revolved around the sun. We didn't know that there were microorganisms that explained disease. We thought diseases came from curses or witches or ill-wishing or devils or dust devils. We didn't know anything from the childish, terrified, ignorant origins of our animal primate species. We come to religion. It's also our first attempt at philosophy, our first attempt at morality, our first attempt at healthcare, actually, but because it was our first, it is our worst. We now have better explanations for all these dreads, and we have cleared up all of these mysteries, yet we still dwell. And in some countries, in some societies, not just dwell, but live under a totalitarian regime that forbids us to think about the progress that has been made or denies us the knowledge that these advances have in fact occurred. So it has become, where once it probably was an aid to our survival, a really great peril to our continued ability to live as a civilized species. Thus, it seems to me that in point of its proposing of a totalitarian solution to what is after all a real problem, to its ghastly reliance upon the supernatural rather than the much more miraculous, much more beautiful, much more elegant, much more numinous, much more harmonious natural explanations. Think how much lovelier Einstein and Darwin are. Think how much more elegant and persuasive they are than the idea of the burning bush, or the demand that without circumcision there can be no redemption. Just picture it, and then I'll give you one final thought experiment. This is what you have to believe now, if you're a monotheist. Because we now know things we didn't used to know. We know that the human species could be as much as 200,000 years ago. Did it become separate from the Cro-Magnons and the rival pre-human species? Could be as little as 100. Richard Dawkins thinks 200,000. Francis Collins, who did the Human Genome Project, who's, by the way, C.S. Lewis kind of Christian, thinks 100,000. All right, I'll take 100. I'll take 100. Here's what you have to believe. For 100,000 years, humans are born as a primate species. Expectation of life, what, 25 years for the first few 100,000 years? First few tens of thousands of years. Infant mortality, rife. Microorganism disease, terrifying. Earthquakes, volcanoes, extraordinary. And fights over land, over territory, over food, over women, over tribalism. Frightening too. For 95, 96,000 years, heaven watches this. With folded arms, with indifference, with coldness. And then around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, but only in really barbaric, illiterate parts of the Middle East. Not in China or where people can read or think or do science. No. In barbaric, illiterate, backward parts of the Middle East, it's decided we can't let this go on, we better intervene. And what better way than by human sacrifices and plagues and mass murder? And if that doesn't make them behave morally, we just don't know what does. If there is a single person in this room who can bring themselves to believe anything remotely like that, they convict themselves of being, first, very stupid, and second, very immoral. And thus it seems to me that the case for divine intervention and for the supernatural falls, and that we should be glad that it's fallen. And thank you. Well, I know it's easy to sneer, but still someone has to do it. And if you like, I will stop with the circumcision, which you think is a trivial thing. I mean, have you ever talked to anyone or interviewed anyone who's been subjected to female genital mutilation because of God's will? You wouldn't say it was trivial or a tease if you had, let alone to the number of boy children who die every year because of the covenant, the hideous covenant that's imposed upon them by Mosaic law, which also, I might add, celebrates every year, in all three monotheisms, the decision of a father to put his knife to his son's throat, because that's how much he loves the dictator. Now, I find this wicked, and I won't have my belief called frivolous. And any one of you who's prepared to show how much you love God and appreciate true north by holding a knife to your firstborn's throat to prove your devotion can stand up now or be regarded by my brother as someone who's not morally serious. And now you see the depth to which, now you see the depth into which religion wants to throw you. Now, my book does have a few jeers at religion, because after all, in this vale of tears, let's do that. But it's been reviewed very seriously by many bishops, many rabbis, by the Pope's chaplain in Rome, all of whom have said, as they've said about previous polemics of mine, that I make some points that they haven't yet come up with an answer to. The reason for that is because they can't. It's not in the nature of them to be able to do so. You either believe, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, in the idea of vicarious redemption, or you do not. And you either think it's morally serious or you don't. In other words, you can either say, yes, I may have sinned badly, but I can throw my sins on another, and he can take them from me and die for me and suffer for me and take my responsibility away, or you don't think so. And I think vicarious redemption is the most immoral idea in current circulation. I could, if I wanted to, if I knew you, or even if I didn't know you, I could offer to take your debt and pay it. It's been done. People will do that for friends, for lovers, even for strangers. I could offer to serve your term in prison, if the law allowed it. Say, I don't think you can do it, probably I can, I'll serve your term, I'll do that for you. But to say, I'll take your sins away, you never committed them. You're washed white as snow and clean as new. And you can watch me being tortured and put to death as a lamb, as a sheep. And I'll call you a sheep, and my congregation will be called a flock. From then on, is a double humiliation. First, it's a hideous outrage on the scapegoat. Second, it's a terrible insult on those who agree to be called sheep. Anyone here want to stand up and say, I'm a sheep? I'm a lamb? Yes. Good for you. Anyone else? Good for the rest of you. Fine. Sheep you are. It's not usually that easy. Now, okay, why is there something, not nothing? Good question. Why is the universe expanding so fast now that it's just been discovered that the red shift of Edwin Hubble is not an expanding rate that is slowing down, as Newton would have had us believe, but is an expanding rate that is speeding up? Physicists thought the universe would slow down. No, the rate of expansion is so great now that very soon it won't be possible. Read Lawrence Krauss's piece in the current Scientific American. Won't even be possible to work out how we ever worked out what the Big Bang was. Such nothingness is coming to us, we won't even know where we were before. And in the meantime, the Andromeda galaxy is heading towards us directly. You can see it in the night sky now with the naked eye. And in 5 billion years, which is in physics time, nothing. It's tomorrow in physics time. It's here. So the something we have now is about to meet with a great deal of nothing. Some design, huh? Who designed that? The question always is the same, even without science. We knew what the philosophers knew. Anyone who claims this is a design must either convict the designer of one thing, extreme incompetence, and noodling and footling and chaotic planning, and probably both, extreme cruelty, callousness, and indifference towards those whom he summoned into existence and made to suffer. These points cannot be overthrown by any kind of casuistry, and certainly were not even challenged by the casuistical efforts you just heard. Thank you. Well, my fellow sheep-like Americans, is it not the case that in the matter of the Eid, the Muslim sacrifice, or in the matter of the Abrahamic sacrifice of Isaac, that the first test the father must pass is to show his God that he's at least willing to do it, that his submission can be taken for granted, even to this extent? Is there anyone here who does not think that that is the grandeur of the story, as well as what I would describe as the horrible sadomasochistic submission? Only then, only when he's shown, yes, I will do it, that's how much I love Big Brother, only then is he released from the obligation. This is the torturing. This is even worse than the book of Job. It's even worse than the toying by the dictator of the fate and emotions of one of his effortlessly made creatures. Anyone who loves this loves to be a slave. Now, on the point of morality, my brother has written very well in England and indeed elsewhere about the awful nihilism and relativism that has poisoned so much of our social and national and collective life. And I have more agreement with him on this than perhaps he understands, but to say that this is to be equated with atheism is simply to misunderstand what nihilism and relativism mean. And that's very... I think I can make this point relatively simply. Someone who says that do what you will must be the whole of the law, that's supposedly what Satanists say at their ceremonies. By the way, Satanists are not atheists by definition. Their satanic majesties are not non-entities. Is giving themselves permission to act entirely as they might wish, at their own pleasure. How does the person who says, God is on my side, act? I don't demand an answer from you. I simply demand you think about my question. How do those act who say, God is on my side? Do they not act as if, do they not behave in Iran, in Iraq, in Bombay, in Beirut, in Belfast, as if they have the right to do anything at all because God has given them permission? Yes, they do. You don't get rid of nihilism. You don't get rid of relativism by claiming you have God in your corner. Rather, you make it possible for any torture, any cruelty, any child abuse, any nightmare of violence and shame to be yours and to be proud of it too. Now, I have two challenges that Peter has despised in the past, but I'm going to repeat them to you, and you decide what you think. If you think that morality must be supernaturally referred, that without heavenly dictatorship we would not have a moral guide, you must have an answer to this question, which I've now asked in print many times, in public many times, radio, TV, any number of times, not yet had an answer to. Name me moral action performed, or moral action recommended, or moral statement made by a believer. Name me one, by a true believer in religion, that could not have been made by a non-believer. Name me one. Think about it. I'm not demanding an answer now. You have all evening. However, you won't need all evening for my corollary question. Name me a wicked statement or a stupid or evil statement made or stupid or evil action performed by someone claiming God's permission to do so. You've already thought of one. Before this evening is over, you'll have thought of 2 or 3 more. The connection between religion and morality proposed by the believers in supernatural dictatorship is thoroughly, utterly, morally null and void. In fact, it's worse than that. It is an excuse for, and has always been, continues to be and will be, an excuse for worse evil than any secularist or atheist could ever have permitted themselves or others. Glad you got that point.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Professor Hitchens, can you...
Dr. Hitchens.
I heard you correct someone in a previous talk and tell them...
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Can you speak on what you see as the relationship between self-interest, enlightened self-interest, and morality?
And?
Morality.
The lady, in case it wasn't audible to all, the lady asks if I will comment on the relationship between enlightened self-interest and morality. My line is not that taken by, for example, Ayn Rand, that selfishness is a virtue on its own. I don't believe in the abnegation of the personality. I don't believe in the horrible Christian idea of masochism, modesty, self-sacrifice, self-hatred, the endless confessions of sin and worthlessness, any more than I believe in the equally vile Quranic idea that we're made not out of dust but out of clots of blood by a celestial dictator. But I think that probably we are innately selfish enough to begin with, because of the process of evolution by natural selection, that we don't need additionally to cultivate our own selfishness. And that the trick, the clue, and the odd thing, and the thing that comes to people strangely naturally is this. They understand about human solidarity. I'll just give you 2 examples, one from each testament. The ancient Jewish people, of course, never went to Sinai and never were in Egypt and never wandered in the desert, and all of that is completely, as everyone now knows from archaeological evidence, none of that ever occurred. But the idea that our Jewish ancestors got as far as Mount Sinai under the impression that rape, murder, theft, and perjury were okay, and only when told by tablets that they weren't all right, felt the penny drop or the shekel drop, is, of course, an insult to our decency and our integrity. They couldn't have got that far or been a people of any kind if they had been under any other impression. So this is innate in us, and it comes from our solidarity, our humanity, our brother and sisterhood. The second is from the so-called New Testament, the Samaritan, so-called, the man from Samaria, who wouldn't see someone just lie bleeding and suffering by the side of the road without helping him. Whatever motive he had, and we don't know what it was, he can't have been a Christian, because it's the alleged Jesus of Nazareth telling the story about someone who existed before he did. And the only people in the story who we're told about who didn't do anything for the victim are the priests and the Levites. So what the story tells us, this parable, is you don't need religion to behave with ordinary decency and morality. And anyone who says you do says that you need dictatorial permission to do the right thing. And then you're a serf. It's in my interest that people don't suffer. I don't want someone bleeding to death from AIDS on my doorstep. Not just for their sake, for mine I don't want that. Oscar Wilde in The Soul of Man Under Socialism puts it very beautifully. He says socialism would free us from the awful necessity of living for others. George Bernard Shaw, when he ran for office in London, said there should be no more houses built for the working classes without baths. And it was objected to him by the Tories and the Conservatives. Why give them baths? The poor are so ignorant and stupid, they won't even know how to use them. They'll keep coal in them. They don't deserve baths. You're wasting your compassion on them. He said, I don't want them to have a bath for their sake. I want them to have a bath for my sake. That's the right mix of self-interest and morality. And it works too. It works. It works. Whereas religious exhortation and telling people, telling children that if they don't do the right thing, they'll go to terrifying punishments or unbelievable rewards, that's making a living out of lying to children. That's what the priesthood do. And if all they did was lie to the children, it would be bad enough. But they rape them and torture them and then hope we'll call it abuse. No, the priesthood must get out of the way for this argument to become grown up. Once more.
Is truth real? And if so, how do you determine it?
Okay, well, having attacked relativism on purpose, I should maybe specify precisely what I meant. To say, it's a famous line, as you know, what is truth, asked jesting Pontius Pilate, and did not stay for an answer. Well, it's a long stay if you do stay for it. What I believe to be the case is that there is a difference between fair-mindedness, impartiality, even-handedness, and objectivity, which is the search for the truth, and the willingness to say that upon coming upon an uncomfortable truth, if it was at one's own expense, it meant one had to change one's own opinion or analysis, one would be obliged to do so. That's what objectivity means. And I think that while the grail of truth may not be entirely attainable, without the idea of it, and without the obligation to seek it very intensely and very seriously, one would be in a rudderless world, a world without true north, if you like. But as Rabbi Hillel says, the task may be unattainable, but that does not mean you can give it up. Rabbi Hillel, by the way, who is the author of the Golden Rule, which the Christians so often claim to be their own. Wrongly, falsely, lyingly, and doubly falsely actually, because the obligation to love others as yourself is an unattainable one. And it's sinister for that reason, because it's demanded of you that you do the impossible. Thus you'll always be falling short, thus you'll always be in sin, thus you'll always be guilty, thus you'll always have to confess. Thus you'll always be in the claws of the priests. That's the trick, as it's said by Fulk Greville, you're created sick and commanded to be well. This is a sadomasochistic relationship with the dictator. You can't be right. You'll always be wrong. The law is such as you can't keep it. Whereas the relatively sane injunction of the Babylonian rabbi, at least, is what is repulsive to another. What is repulsive to you, you should not do to another. That's a decent rule. But no one had better stand up and tell me that I need a God to tell me that.
Peter, did you want to respond?
No, I love it.
Okay, we have a question up in the balcony.
Yes, this is a question for Professor Hitchens again.
Doctor.
Doctor, fair enough. On your website and in your books, Build Up That Wall, you mention eliminating taxation, freedom of taxation for churches. And I was wondering what your thoughts were as to how that might, if we were to someday do something like that, how that might affect the separation of church and state that we enjoy right now.
Well, it seems to me a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment that any religious institution can receive any payment from the United States government. I would regard being tax-exempt or tax-free as a disguised form of subsidy, as I regard the so-called faith-based initiative to be a surreptitious violation of the same. Yeah. I should say for sincere believers that there's an excellent reason why the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment was first proposed. It wasn't proposed just by people like myself who wouldn't go any further than deism in their attitude to religion. It was proposed by many people who were quite devout and who thought not just that the government must not be corrupted by religion, but that the churches mustn't be corrupted by the association with the state either. And I think that's an equally morally valid point. James Madison, the co-author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom and of the First Amendment and the other things that bodyguard our wonderful Republican secular constitution, didn't think there should be chaplains to open Congress, didn't even think there should be chaplains in the armed forces. If people want to pray in the army, they can. No one can stop them, but we're not going to pay for someone to pray over them. These are very tough questions, but it must be understood that these were part of the very urgent views of the framers and the founding fathers, and it's our responsibility to be discussing this very seriously now at a time when Hillary Clinton has joined some reactionary evangelical organization, John McCain, to try and bolster her faith-based connections. John McCain, a lifelong Episcopalian, has this year, I wonder why, said he's a Baptist. And Barack Obama, Senator Obama, has been caught in some big-mouthed, sinister, windbag, rock and roll horror show church on the South Side. Religion is poisoning our election and our democratic republic, and it's time that we've said enough. If you want to be a fraud and a fundraiser and a shakedown artist and a big mouth and an ethno-racist in this country, try your best. But it's long past time that we said putting Reverend in front of your name is not enough of an achievement to do that. Much too lightly. Okay? Voila. I mean, I think there is a ghost of a point there, but it's only this ghost. It's the following. That evolution occurred is conclusively verified by the record of molecular biology and of fossil record. There has never been an article in any peer-reviewed journal, and there never will be, to say to the contrary. However, that's only to say that it did occur. How it occurred is not something that's completely consensual, and the Darwinian theory of natural selection is only so far the least contested of those explanations. And Stephen Jay Gould, for example, of whom I was something of a friend and a great admirer, and Richard Dawkins, who's also a friend of mine, had a tremendous disagreement, still do, posthumous in the case of now, about punctuated evolution, about the steps by which this occurred. But that it occurred is not to be doubted. And thus the idea that there can be equal time for the opposite theory in a science class is as false as to say, well, children, the chemistry period is over, now after the break we'll be doing our alchemy class. Or your astronomy teacher is off today, but your astrology alternate can check in. Nonsense. And when President Bush says we should teach the argument, I'm with him, if he's sincere, because everything I know about the Darwin argument comes from two great set-piece debates. One in Oxford in the late Victorian epoch between Bishop Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley, the inventor of the term agnostic, about Darwinism, and the second in Tennessee in the 1920s, even more famous. But if the president wants that, and he wants his faith-based initiative, then every church that gets a subsidy or a grant must also teach Darwinism. Equal time. Is that what the president wants? I am sure I know the answer to that.
Thank you.
You're a fine American,
question.
Christopher.
Everybody, wasn't it? You first.
I really couldn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I'll tell you.
He
He said, what about subjective experience? If someone says, I had a religious experience and I went on to do a noble action, shouldn't we credit that to religion? Would that be a fair précis of your question, sir? He says yes. I have an answer, but I'm sure you do too.
I suppose so. It doesn't seem to present any difficulties to my position, so I think I'll hand it over to him.
Well, I mean, one of the best books for the unbeliever to read is William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, which is, by the way, is a trope you come up against a lot with C.S. Lewis, many other religious writers. They say, you who believe in the material world and don't believe in the supernatural, you can't account for the experiences of revelation and enlightenment and miracles that other people experience. And you don't understand the numinous, in other words. And I say that that's true for me. I don't. And I don't trust them, though I do think they can be confused with experiences of nature, landscape, music, sex and love, the numinous in other ways. But if these experiences, the positive ones, are going to be credited to the religion account, then so must the person who says that God told him to go and get a gun and kill all the unveiled girls in Netherlands. If all these things are going to be charged, they've all got to be charged. And that would leave us exactly where the argument from design leaves us, and all the others leave, where we started. Ça va?
I don't...
28. They thought this was really great. And that a group of atheists would cheer a man who killed between 40 and 60 million people, and I would now do it having spent months with him, and this is something they look up to. And this is the top of the people who do this. The Chinese, who were atheists, killed, 100 to 200 million people? They did 90 million people in one, locking up 2 provinces in the north, and they preached atheism. And Trotsky went and preached atheism across Russia, and then he hung priests from the back of the train. To say that atheism will kill without any limit if it gets into power anywhere. This has been proved from one end of the world to another. After Ethiopia, wait, this is your
Sir,
thing.
I need you to wrap up the
Atheism will
question.
kill. There is no defense.
Sir, we need a, excuse me,
The
sir,
question is-
sir, we need a question, please.
question
No,
is-
he's got made a perfectly good question.
How can you defend atheism? I mean, how can there be, you say that atheism won't kill? I mean, if you bring atheism back in a government, it will kill as many people.
No, the question by the way, I thought it was a perfectly well-phrased question. To be an atheist doesn't guarantee you against being a sadist or a nihilist or a fascist or a Stalinist or a Maoist, though it's slightly unlikely I think you'd be a fascist or a National Socialist, but it's I would say, a necessary condition for enlightenment, not a sufficient one. And I'll take your question seriously in the following way. The 20th century totalitarianisms that are accused of being secular, I'll say something about each of them. It was a long question, so I hope you'll allow me. I'll try and condense it. To start with the original 20th century totalitarian ideology, which originally called itself fascism. If in any account you read of fascism, historical account you read, from its origins in Italy, through Spain, Portugal, Croatia, Hungary, Slovakia, etc. If you take out the word fascist and put Catholic right wing, it's the same story. There's no difference. And if you add parties in political alliance with the Vatican, it's the same. All of them. Fascism is another word for the Christian Catholic right wing. In Slovakia, the actual head of the fascist dictatorship was a priest, Father Tiso. In almost every case, the regime was in holy orders and or with the direct alliance with the Pope himself. That's a simple matter. Anyone can check it out. I'm not going to assert it now. I would just say fact-checking, and I would be as one on this point. Now, that's not completely true with National Socialism. It's true of the Nazi Party in Austria and Bavaria in its heartlands that it begins blessed by the Vatican, by a concordat with the Church, by the Protestant churches also. But it's not true to say it's a Christian movement in quite the same way. It's a pagan movement to some extent. My favorite example is this, I suppose. Joseph Goebbels was expelled from the Catholic Church. He was. He was the only Nazi who was. Why was he expelled? for marrying a divorced Protestant. Magda Goebbels. You see, the church does have its standards. However, it is estimated by Paul Johnson, Catholic historian, that more than 40% of the Waffen-SS were practicing, confessing Catholics. No one was ever excommunicated or threatened with excommunication for taking part in the final solution. And that was because of the alliance between the Nazi Party and the Church on two main things, anti-Bolshevism and anti-Semitism. Again, I'm condensing a bit. Now it brings me to the Stalinists. Okay, you're Joseph Stalin. You've taken over Russia. You've been educated in a seminary in Georgia, by the way. Up till 1917, for hundreds of years, hundreds of millions of Russians have been told that the head of the state is a god, that the Tsar is above power, ordinary secular power, that he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church as well as the... You shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you can't take advantage of a deep well of credulity and servility like that. It's your golden opportunity. What does he do? Heresy trials. Heresy trials, witch hunts, miraculous discoveries such as Lysenko's biology, the worship of the leader from whom all blessings flow. As I described North Korea, the most religious state I've ever seen. Mutatis mutandis, this would apply also to Mao's China, with the same background of superstition and servility. Now, for there to be a fair test about this, you'd have to do the following. And no one I've ever debated with has even tried it. So you be the first. You find me a state or a society that threw off theocracy and threw off religion and said we adopt the teachings of Lucretius and Democritus and Galileo and Spinoza and Darwin and Russell and Jefferson and Thomas Paine. And we make those what we teach our children. We make that scientific and rational humanism our teaching. And you find me that state that did that and fell into tyranny and slavery and famine and torture, and then we'll be on a level playing field. As it is, all you've done is show that the idea of worship and the idea of credulity and the idea of servility and slavery to religion is a bad idea in the first place.
But none of the czars and none of the Chinese kings, none of this...
By the way, the Russian Orthodox Church always stayed with Stalin, always stayed with Stalin.
But they never killed 30% of their population.
Who didn't?
The Russians never killed 30% of the population before the communists took over, 20 or 30%. No czar ever did that. No Christian czar ever did any killing on anyone.
Well, no, excuse me, they started the First World War. They started the pogroms. They brought the protocols of the Elders of Zion that was imported by Tsarist secret policemen to National Socialist Christian gangsters in Europe. How much do you think the export of Russian Orthodox anti-Semitism cost us in point of lives and war? And have you ever counted up what happened to the wars that Tsarism started and carried on, and the persecutions, and the famines, and the tortures, and the starvation, and the people who just died of neglect? Come on. You want to do this accounting? I'm here. I'm really here for you. Or what the Serbian Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox have just done in the Balkans. The most recent genocide we've seen in Europe, entirely done by Russian and Serbian Orthodox fascists and Catholic Croatian Ustaša, grinding a whole part of civilized Europe into nothingness and bloodshed for their filthy, stupid medieval quarrels. How dare you say that any secularist, we who've opposed this kind of barbaric stuff, are on all fours with these creeps? You should take it back. You owe me an apology. You lose, Boychik. You lose, Boychik.
Please. Hey, civility.
Conducted fairly. Hitler's birthday was celebrated from the pulpit by order of the Vatican, by every church in Germany, till the last day of his regime. Do I say that makes you a National Socialist? No, I don't. No, I don't. I would know how to if I was capable of a low blow. But as you know, I'm not.
Peter, any last response?
No, it's obviously futile.
Our last
It's
question.
invincible faith.
In the last few years, we've witnessed.
Speak up.
In the last few years, we've witnessed many atrocities perpetrated by fundamentalists, and I'm concerned that we run the risk of letting our responses fall into a fundamentalist mode of thinking. And I'd like to have each of you comment on that.
I'm not sure I got the grammar of your question, sir. I must be honest.
Well, the concern I have is that how can we sustain a modern secular response to medieval fundamentalist atrocities? And how can we convince our politicians to take a secular modern approach to thinking about these things and educating the populace about them?
There's something slightly faint about the question, I have to say. I'm going to assume I know what you mean by fundamentalist. So if we take the best known current political dispute in which this country is involved, I suppose, and the oldest one and the best understood, it would probably be the question of Palestine, okay? Where there has been for some time a conflict between two nationalisms, approximately equivalent size of peoples, Jewish and Arab, over a piece of land about the size of Wales, with great and quite just claims, emotionally just claims on both of their parts going back quite a long time. For a long time now, the solution to this very difficult matter has seemed to many people to be something like a partition, an award of roughly half each of the disputed territory. It's not perfect, it's not great, but it is the accepted view of the PLO now, of most of the Israeli voting public, of the vast majority of American Jews, of the UN, of the European Union, of the international community, and so on. And it makes a rough kind of sense. It's not brilliant, but it's thinkable. It's not insane. Why can't we get what everyone seems to want? Because of religion. That's why. Because there are enough people on the Jewish side to say, what land split? God gave all this land to us. All of it to us. And on the other side, it doesn't take much to say, you're dead right about that. God did award all the land, but not to you, to the Muslims only. And there are enough of them to make certain there cannot be a solution. And just as if that wasn't enough, the mad supporters of Judaism and the mad supporters of Islam, the American Christians to the rescue. With luck, if the Jews can be supported long enough, as our rope supports the hanging man, they can bring on the Battle of Armageddon, the thing we all secretly yearn for, as all religions do. Totalitarian first in their origin, genocidal in their conclusions. We want this to be over. We want this world to pass away. We are pointless without that demand. We are not humanists. We are eschatologists. And hey, what could be more wonderful? The Jews will bring it on, and those who aren't converted in time to Christianity will be turned to ash, as will everybody else. So what could be more heavenly than that? So now you see why religion poisons everything. These congregations and their religions and the filthy texts on which they base themselves earnestly desire that everything we call civilization, and everyone in this room, be destroyed. They want it, they relish it, they work for it while you're asleep, as well as while you're awake. Coexistence with this kind of thing is as impossible as coexistence with fascism or Stalinism. The sooner we wake up to it, the better our chances of survival will be.
Thank you, Christopher.
Talking about Iraq. Anyone who says that Saddam Hussein was, okay, a bad guy, doesn't know what they're talking about. You hear that said quite a lot. They don't know. They don't know what fascism feels like. They don't know what it's like to see families forced at gunpoint to applaud the torture and execution in public of their family members. They don't know what it's like to see 180,000 members of the Kurdish people, at a minimum, killed by poison gas in the northern provinces of Iraq. They don't know what it's like to see at least that number of Shia Arabs killed in southern Iraq. They don't know what it took, Anglo-American, British-American policy, to put a no-fly zone from 1991 onwards over those two zones to make sure that those two genocides could not be replicated. They don't know what it would be like to be a citizen of Kuwait or Iran, seeing Saddam Hussein's army coming over the horizon, attacking your civilians in that way, abolishing, in one case, the whole existence of a member state of the Arab League and of the the Islamic Conference and of the United Nations, abolishing it, annexing it, making it part of Iraq. They didn't hear the speech from Saddam Hussein saying the only mistake he ever made was that he invaded Kuwait before he'd finished the nuclear weapon. He should have done it the other way round. First get the nuclear weapon at the Tuwaitha reactor, which we found as a result of the Kuwait war when we weren't looking for it. Get the bomb first, then invade Kuwait, then ask them what they're going to do now that I've invaded it. Don't do it, don't get it the wrong way around. We lived at this man's permission for a long time. We lived by his warrant. Only his stupidity allowed us to be as complacent as we were. And in the meantime, fighters in northern and southern Iraq were fighting against a tyrant who we should have been fighting ourselves. The liberation of Iraq, in other words, the decision that we had to move the Iraqi people and the region into a post-Saddam era, will stand, I'm convinced, as one of the greatest decisions of American statecraft, as one of the things that American soldiers, male and female, and politicians who voted for it, those who've defended it, will be proudest of in the future of any decision we've ever made. Despite the ridicule, despite the incompetence, despite the failures, despite the disappointments, let us review what we've done. First, we have removed a keystone state of the Middle East from the control and sole ownership of a psychopathic crime family who owned all of Iraq and treated its people as if they were disposable citizens. I remind you that this keystone state occupies a choke point on the Gulf and an arterial carotid point in the world economy that cannot be left to the control of a fascistic mafia. I remind you further that it exists between the exorbitant Sunni Wahhabi theocracy of Saudi Arabia and the no less exorbitant Shia theocracy of Iran, that it is the keystone that allows us, yes us, we who have the right to do this, we who have the right to insist on oil, we who don't have to be ashamed of mentioning oil in the same breath as democracy, to say, if we can recuperate Iraq, if we can recuperate its oil industry, if we can stop it being the private property of a psychopathic crime family, we can not only help the Iraqis, but we can undercut the monopoly or the duopoly of Shia Iran and Wahhabi Saudi Arabia. Does anyone think this is a matter of indifference? Or is anyone willing to get up and say, you, sir, very good for you. I admire your nerve. I wouldn't mind if you were the only one, as you seem to be. You're indifferent to it. The rest of us here, voters and consumers, all believers in freedom, might possibly want to take the view that it can't be for us a nothing question what happens to Iraq. We'll add, in the remaining time, that we have brought one of the great war criminals of the world to justice and put him and his crime family and his main complicit associates on trial in public in a country where, until recently, very recently, it was death, slow death, very slow death, to possess a cell phone or a satellite dish. That we have undone what UNESCO calls the greatest crime against the human ecology ever committed, the destruction of the marshes of southern Iraq, the oldest wetlands in the Middle East, the smoke and destruction of which could be seen from the space shuttle, so terrible was the environmental decay. That we have proclaimed the autonomy of the Kurdish people, the oldest and largest nation in the world not to have a state of their own, and that where they live in their federalized, democratized provinces in northern Iraq, which were released from Saddam Hussein's control a full 12 years before the liberation of the rest of the country, business flourishes, press flourishes, democracy flourishes, civil society flourishes. The sooner, the earlier the intervention by the British and American forces in Iraq, in other words, the happier, the sooner, the greater, the deeper, the more enduring, and the more useful in the future is the outcome. I'm willing to defend, because I've just seen time, I'm willing to defend and underline and repeat and restate and emphasize everything I have said so far. So all of you who've come here under the pathetic illusions peddled by Hillary Clinton, Harry Reid, and MoveOn.org have all your work still ahead of you. And you thought it was going to be easy, didn't you? Bye now.
Next question.
Before I attempt to challenge Mr. Christopher Hitchens with a question, Professor Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you.
I should say that I've taught a number of your books here at Grand Valley State University. My students revere them, and so do I.
Thank you.
You've been a very eloquent critic of empire throughout your career, and as a young man, I admired you a great deal for it. Are you prepared to admit now that the United States adventure in Iraq is also an adventure in imperial activity? You asked this audience what a person who acts as if God is on their side acts like, and I would suggest to you that that person acts much like the candidate you supported in 2004, George W. Bush, in particular as regards the adventure in Iraq.
Yes. No, I quite understand your point, and my response would be the following, and I hope you're ready for it. And
I'll do my best.
And those who did that clapping thing that they still haven't, is this: everything the United States has done in Iraq has been imperial since 1968, at least. When the Central Intelligence Agency claims that it helped install the Saddam Hussein wing of the Ba'ath Party, follow me here, not just the Ba'ath Party, bad enough, a fascist party with some Stalinist inflections, but the Saddam Hussein wing of it in power in Baghdad. That's how the CIA claimed to have acted in 1968. The United States was still an empire in 1974 when Henry Kissinger promised the Iraqi Kurds American support in their fight against Saddam Hussein with the backing of the Shah of Iran and Israel, and didn't tell them that he was about to sell them out when Saddam Hussein and the Shah of Iran were going to make a handshake over their dead bodies. That was just as imperial. It was, the United States was an empire when Jimmy Carter gave a green light to Saddam Hussein to invade Iran in 1980, and told them that with American intelligence supplied by satellite through Saudi Arabia, that they would achieve a swift victory over the Iranians and probably recover the Arabic-speaking territories of Khuzestan, of Persia, for Iraqi control. That war, we reckon, I've been to the cemeteries in Iran and in Baghdad of that war, probably not less than 1.5 million casualties. I haven't factored in all the casualties. All of these were imperial. In other words, if the United States is either imperial or it isn't, if it is, it's just as imperial not to intervene in Iraq and to leave the status quo the way it is, as it is to intervene. In 2003, for the first time I know about, the United States intervened in Iraq on the right side. And I'm proud of having advocated that policy. Okay? I knew I wouldn't get any applause. But I just want you to know that's what I think is the distinction. No. Hold. Please, that's the distinction. Now, there was not to intervene would have been just as imperialist. And that was the attitude that Kissinger, Scowcroft, Bush Sr., Pat Buchanan, and the other elements of the conservative and imperialist right did advocate, because these are the Saudi lobby who are the core of imperialism in my hometown of Washington. They said, no, leave Saddam Hussein as the buffer state. We like things the way they are. Don't you tell me that's a non-interventionist policy, okay? And don't tell yourself that, because you're letting yourself and your MoveOn.org friends off